I'm aware of it's nearly 260,000. I'm asking for the number of providers that have collapsed in the last 3 years.
And we don't collect that data at an individual level. The only data that we have is the total number of providers who are making claims, and where a provider is a registered provider, we do have numbers about how many registered providers have exited the market.
Right. Well, in total, you've got about 64 million that it's owed to the unpaid tax in superannuation and wages from providers that have actually collapsed. That's $64 million. And that's why I'm asking, and I want to know what you're doing about it.
So we don't have information about their tax that relates to how much unpaid tax or superannuation that an individual provider would have. There'd be questions for other departments. We don't collect that.
But you must know that you've got providers on your books that these organisations have collapsed. One, for a case in point, is Cocoon collapsed and left the debt of payments owing millions.
Before we continue, do us a little favour by subscribing to the channel, because over 98% of you watching haven't subscribed. It costs you nothing, not even a penny, to join this channel. Have you subscribed? Thanks so much.
Now, if you're allowing these people to get on your books and act as a provider or a company or a business and that type of thing, that's taxpayers' dollars that are paying them. These are either scams or your governance of your organisation is hopeless. So which is it?
Senator, John Dardo, and I am very aware of the issue you're raising, and I'm very concerned about the issue that you're raising.
Can I just ask the nameplates be put up? Sorry, it just makes it easy for us to reference who's at the desk. Sorry to interrupt.
I might continue while that's coming.
Yeah.
The first thing to note is that under current tax secrecy provisions, the tax office is not allowed to share data with us before we register a provider or before we pay a provider. So that is just something that is not allowed under current tax secrecy provisions. So even if we wanted to see that today, before we register or before we pay a provider, we are not allowed to see that. In the Fraud Fusion Task Force, Senator, we have created the ability to see tax data for very specific cases that are referred into the Fraud Fusion Task Force, and we treat those cases holistically, including having the tax office. We refer cases to the tax office, and we have the tax office work with us to treat those cases. We've been very transparent about this gap in the law, and we went to, it was included in a consultation paper that was distributed in December 2024 by Treasury on the tax secrecy provisions, and there was commentary provided by the sector, by the professional associations, the accountant professions and others on the fact that that secrecy provision exists and what the future may look like. But I just want to be really transparent. That is not a new thing. That's always been a thing. And unless the law is changed, we will not be allowed to know the tax circumstances of a provider before we register or pay them.
I'm quite well aware of that. So what I'm saying is, if you've got all these businesses that are folding, going under, owing millions of dollars, so along the way you have not done your job properly in having a clear governance over how this money is spent, especially when organisations get to millions of dollars that is owed, not only to the tax debts, but other debts and payments and wages. That is taxpayers' dollars. Now, I've asked you questions now for a figure. I've got the figures here of 22, 23, 23, 24 of fraud payments. Now, you tell me that it's probably a lot bigger than what you said, because it's $77 million over 2 years. You won't give me the fraud figures for 24, 25. You are moving the goalposts, you're moving definitions, you're not being upfront with the Australian people of what's going on. That's only recorded what you've caught them out to proven or in the courts. How much more fraud is going on there that you're not telling the Australian taxpayer? We're talking about a 52 to $55 billion industry that is going to blow out to $100 billion by 2032. And I know constantly I'm hearing from people the number of scams that's going on. I'll ask you this question also. The NDIS Integrity Program blocked $86 million in payments in 24-25. What are you going to do to rein in and eradicate this fraudulent behaviour? If you've picked this up to block it, why did they get to a stage that they can actually be providers? So is it, again, your governance?
So I think, just to be very, very transparent, there are multiple layers of work that we're doing to give us an assurance that providers that are working in the scheme are the right providers. For registered providers, and keep in mind there's the difference between registered and unregistered. For registered providers, we have now improved the way we identity proof them. We've improved the way we identity proof their staff, so we know who we're dealing with. There is a lot more work happening in identifying those providers that need to be removed at an earlier point in time because of their claiming. As I shared earlier, we've taken out at least 2,500 of those that have previously claimed $5 billion, and we've stopped them from being able to claim. We are referring to the tax office every provider that we think has a problem with their affairs. We are referring them to other agencies if they've been involved in any other agency process, and we're using the Fraud Fusion Task Force to take them out. We're referring to the Commission for the Commission to treat through a range of mechanisms. The breadth of the interventions is unprecedented. It's never been done in any government program in history. And some of these interventions never existed before we built them in the Fraud Fusion Task Force. On top of that, we are, there is work that will happen, in reform about unregistered providers and what they may need to look like in the future. And so as we go forward, we have, a forward work plan about how we make payments more transparent, so we can see the bank account that they're going to for every provider, and so that we can report that information to the tax office in a more timely way. And so that will mean the tax office will be able to see that. We are already working on that design, and we're already building the systems for that. But there is no doubt that there are things that we are not allowed to see and not allowed to do today under current law. We are not allowed to see today, for the 270,000 providers, something that indicates for us whether they have or haven't paid tax for the last year or the last 3 years. We are not allowed to see that by law. That is not a fault of the NDIS or the NDIA administering it. That is just a fact of law. So
is that government policy?
It's been the law for decades. So that is the current state of the law. As I said, the consultation has occurred around what that may or may not look like, but the question that you're asking, that limitation is a limitation of the law, not our administration.
If you thought Canberra was going to ease into the week quietly, think again. Because just moments ago, a fiery Senate committee exchange turned into one of the most tense confrontations over the National Disability Insurance Scheme we've seen in quite some time. Senator Pauline Hanson came armed with figures, examples, and one central question that she refused to let go. How can billions of taxpayer dollars continue flowing through the system if there are still major concerns about fraud, provider failures, and oversight? And the answers she received only seemed to raise even more questions. This wasn't just another committee hearing full of bureaucratic language. It became a political showdown over accountability, transparency, and whether Australia's rapidly growing NDIS has outpaced the systems designed to protect it. Now, before we get into it, remember this. The NDIS supports hundreds of thousands of Australians living with disability, and the overwhelming majority of participants and providers are doing the right thing. But today's clash wasn't about those people. It was about the integrity of the system itself and whether the safeguards are keeping up. So what exactly happened? Let's break it down. From the opening exchange, Hanson went straight onto the attack. Instead of accepting broad explanations, she demanded specific numbers. She wanted to know how many providers had collapsed over recent years and what happened to taxpayers' money when businesses failed while still owing debts, wages, or superannuation. The officials explained that they simply don't collect some of the information Hanson was asking for. They said data relating to unpaid tax or other financial obligations belongs with different agencies and isn't available to them in the way she was suggesting. But that answer didn't satisfy Hanson, not even close. She argued that if organisations are receiving taxpayer-funded payments through the scheme, surely someone should have a clear picture of whether those businesses are financially collapsing or leaving significant debts behind. Her message was blunt. If providers are folding while millions remain unpaid elsewhere, Australians are entitled to ask whether enough checks are happening before public money goes out the door. That exchange set the tone for everything that followed. Then came one of the biggest points of disagreement. The officials pointed to long-standing tax secrecy laws. They explained that under current legislation, tax authorities cannot simply share a provider's tax information before registration or payment. According to the evidence given, those legal barriers have existed for years and are not something the agency can simply ignore. In other words, they argued their hands are tied unless Parliament changes the law. But Hanson wasn't convinced that explanation was enough. She pushed back by arguing that Australians don't care which agency holds which database if taxpayer money is still ending up with businesses that later collapse or become the subject of serious concerns. To many watching, that captured a much wider frustration. Ordinary Australians don't think in departmental silos. They expect government agencies to work together. Whether you're a nurse, electrician, truck driver, farmer, or small business owner, many people simply assume that if billions of dollars are involved, someone is checking whether warning signs exist before payments continue. That became the emotional centre of the hearing. Not legal technicalities, trust. As the questioning continued, Hanson shifted toward fraud. She challenged officials over publicly reported fraud figures and suggested the real amount of wrongdoing could be significantly higher than what has already been detected. Importantly, the officials did not agree with that suggestion as a statement of fact. Instead, they explained that published figures generally relate to identified or proven cases and that the agency has significantly expanded its integrity work. According to their evidence, thousands of providers have already been removed from claiming after risk assessments and investigations. Officials also described stronger identity verification, increased cooperation between agencies, and new technology designed to identify suspicious claiming behaviour earlier than before. They repeatedly argued that the integrity response today is far stronger than it was several years ago. But Hanson continued asking the obvious political question. If so many improvements have only recently been introduced, what does that say about what happened beforehand? That's the question now echoing well beyond the committee room. Because the NDIS is no small government programme, it represents one of Australia's biggest public investments. Its cost has become a major issue in federal politics, with both major parties acknowledging the importance of protecting participants while also reducing fraud, waste and misuse. This week, discussion about government spending has again placed pressure on ministers to demonstrate that every taxpayer dollar is being properly protected. And that's where today's hearing could have lasting political consequences. Social media reacted almost immediately. Supporters of Hanson argued she was asking questions many Australians have wanted answered for years. Others defended the officials, pointing out that public servants must operate within legislation passed by Parliament and cannot simply invent new powers whenever problems emerge. That distinction matters. If legal information sharing restrictions are the real obstacle, responsibility ultimately shifts toward lawmakers rather than administrators alone. Still, politically, explanations rarely attract as much attention as confrontations, and today's confrontation was impossible to ignore. Another interesting moment came when officials described the Fraud Fusion Task Force. According to the evidence presented, the task force brings together multiple agencies to identify suspicious activity, refer matters for investigation, and improve cooperation across government. Officials argued these arrangements are unprecedented and designed specifically to close gaps that previously existed. Supporters say those reforms demonstrate government agencies are taking fraud seriously. Critics respond that reforms only became necessary because vulnerabilities had already been exposed. That's the political divide. One side points to stronger enforcement. The other asks why stronger enforcement wasn't already in place. Meanwhile, Australians watching from home often have a much simpler concern. Will money intended for people living with disability actually reach those people? That question cuts across party lines. No matter how someone votes, very few Australians support criminals exploiting programs designed to assist vulnerable citizens. And that's why debates like today's generate such intense public interest. They touch something much bigger than politics. They touch confidence. Confidence that taxes are being spent wisely. Confidence that vulnerable Australians are protected. Confidence that dishonest operators are identified quickly rather than years later. As the hearing continued, officials outlined future reforms under consideration. They spoke about better payment transparency, stronger verification processes, and systems that could allow agencies to identify risks more effectively while remaining within legal boundaries. They also noted that any broader access to tax information would likely require legislative change. That shifted attention straight back to Parliament. Because if lawmakers believe agencies need stronger powers, then lawmakers must decide whether those powers should be granted. Expect that debate to continue, especially as the long-term sustainability of the NDIS remains a major issue across Australian politics. Government ministers have repeatedly stated that protecting the scheme requires both supporting genuine participants and preventing abuse. Opposition figures continue demanding stronger accountability and greater transparency around spending. Crossbench senators have also pushed for tougher oversight in different areas of the scheme. In other words, this debate is far from over, and neither side appears ready to back down. One striking feature of today's exchange was the contrast in communication styles. Officials relied on legislation, procedures, and administrative limitations. Hanson focused on public expectations, accountability, and taxpayer confidence. Both approaches appealed to different audiences. For some viewers, the detailed legal explanations demonstrated why complex problems cannot be solved overnight. For others, the explanations sounded like bureaucracy getting in the way of common sense. That's often how parliamentary hearings work. Facts collide with politics. Administration collides with public frustration, and committee rooms become the stage where those tensions play out. The broader question now is whether today's hearing increases pressure for legislative reform. Could Parliament eventually revisit information sharing rules? Will integrity powers be expanded further? Will additional safeguards be introduced for providers entering the system? Those questions remain open. What today's hearing clearly demonstrated is that the debate surrounding the NDIS is evolving beyond funding alone. Increasingly, the discussion centres on governance, transparency, and maintaining public trust. That conversation isn't likely to disappear anytime soon, because every dollar lost to fraud or serious misuse is a dollar that cannot support Australians who genuinely rely on disability services. That's why integrity matters. That's why oversight matters. And that's why exchanges like today's attract so much attention. Whether viewers agreed more with Senator Hanson or with the officials responding to her questions, one thing became unmistakably clear: Australians expect answers. They expect accountability, and they expect the system to keep improving. Today's Senate hearing didn't settle the debate. If anything, it intensified it. Questions remain. Will future reforms be enough? Should laws governing information sharing be changed? Have integrity measures arrived quickly enough? Or does Parliament need to move faster? Those are questions that will continue shaping political discussion in the weeks ahead. What do you think? Was Senator Pauline Hanson asking the tough questions that needed to be asked? Or did the officials provide reasonable explanations based on the law as it currently stands? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this breakdown of Australian politics and want more coverage of the biggest clashes from Parliament, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who follows what's happening in Canberra. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.